welcome to the stage, Vincent.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. So very excited to talk a bit about a DEAC vision for decentralized AI. So I think in very few fields, like the kind of like philosophical principles of like DEAC are more important than for AI, where I think like really we're like kind of like standing at the crossroads. Like this is from Vitalik's blog post on this, where really there's these two camps more recently. Obviously, some of you seen it probably on Twitter or on X, on both kind of like decels or the hardcore safetyists who want to stop AI and think like it's extremely dangerous and like speak of like 99% probabilities of us dying, as well as like the extreme optimists who are basically talking about like no risk whatsoever. And I think like it's extremely important to take like the synthesis of those views, because I think extreme optimism and extreme pessimism kind of lead to inaction. And I think the more realistic view is that like there's a lot of like positive things, and I think also a lot of risks. And I think actually quite importantly, even the people talking about the risks, they often obviously propose things like, for example, alignment and safety, but then it ends up in this kind of like totalitarian, almost like one world government views of like heavy compute governance, like nation states enforcing things behind closed doors and kind of fantasizing about like the desert project behind closed doors to build super intelligence with our bros. Like that's kind of, I think, like a really the dangerous almost like proposal from like the people building the technology, like the closed frontier AI labs, which are obviously predominantly based in the US and maybe China. So I think there's kind of like a middle ground, and I'll talk through the different 4 aspects of DEAC, and we'll try to like bring them back to AI. So I think on the one side there's like differential progress, and the idea that progress is great, but you need to make progress on things that make the world a safer place. Kind of the principle of decentralization and of open architectures and open source, of democracy and of defense. So I'll go through one by one. So kind of like on the differential progress point, I think it's quite important that basically like this point that like not all technological progress is equal, and there's some progress which basically makes the world a safer place and is great to put in place beforehand and basically accelerate differentially, like basically meaning that there's some things which if we solve them, and a lot of the things we cover today, like biosafety would be a great example. It's one of the things also the AI people are most worried about is biosafety. So if we wouldn't have to worry about any pandemic, if we would have like all the vaccines and all the detection, then potentially there would be less risk from AI as well. So we kind of really need to accelerate some of those defensive capabilities that we discussed today, to have like a safe kind of like ground for also like AI progress more broadly. And I think really importantly also like enhance kind of like human agency. The second one is decentralized and open source architectures. And I think this one is actually extremely important, and I think the problem a bit is that like the camp taking very short timelines and like AGI very seriously is usually the closed source camp of people, like the OpenAIs of the world. And then a lot of the open source people, like exemplified maybe by Llama and Jan LeCun, are kind of almost like AI pessimists, I would say. Like they're basically, they don't really take the possibilities seriously that we'll get like very fast progress over the next like 5 to 10 years. So they also don't take the risks as seriously potentially. But I do think that like there's a lot to learn from like open source and decentralized technologies, and it's actually incredibly important, I think, not to like build AI in a vacuum in like single labs, but rather I think like building them decentralized and open source makes it way easier to be safe, because everyone in the world can like audit, can see the code, right, and can help improve it and make it safer. And also it's like you don't have to repeat the effort, right? It's like right now every AGI lab is doing safety, but they're doing it in a vacuum. Like they're doing the safety basically 5 times. Like they're not coordinating on sharing their research as much as they could. So I think really the core of this is also like that the natural tendency of AI is really towards concentration, right? Like you need a lot of compute, as also Emma touched on. So I think there's basically the natural drivers towards massive centralization and also towards kind of like nation states capturing it for their own interests, which I think is potentially some of the like the biggest risk from it is basically it's like almost like very heavy-handed governments enforcing kind of like AI governance and policy and kind of like making it very hard for individuals to participate. So there's different elements to this. Like I think there's also obviously kind of like now more and more things happening at the intersection of crypto and AI and decentralized AI. A lot of it is still very nascent, so yeah, I think there's a lot of things to do. I think one thing that I think is actually crucial is that I think even like crypto and decentralized AI could contribute to things like verification of specific safety properties, for example, to actually like basically advance the technology safely. The other piece is like democracy, and I think one interesting element there is that like a lot of the proposed solutions from the AI labs is like obviously AI governance and policy, but like it usually happens in a board of 5 people that can then kind of like make those decisions, or behind closed doors in some small government. It's not really like a global democratic input into AI. Like it's really like limited to a small set of people. So I think actually it's extremely important that like basically AI and AGI development is like accountable to the broader public and takes like democratic inputs, not just from like specific countries or specific stakeholders, but kind of like across the population. And really then it preserves kind of like those democratic values, as well as kind of like distributes the benefits broadly, right? It's like, I don't know how many people really trust in like kind of like the changing narratives of some of the big closed labs like OpenAI that obviously promise to spread everything, like spread the benefits from the technology. I think like this promise got weaker and weaker over time. So I think at this point I think there's very few people who actually trust them to spread the benefits of the technology if they're tempted and kind of like shareholder wealth maximization entities. The other fourth piece is defense. So I think basically it's quite important to build these like protective capabilities because I think there is obviously very concrete risks which are also solvable. So it goes back to like differential progress. It's like we'll get all the upside from AI like if we actually build it in the open, like open source, if we make it safe to use and easy to use for people. So I think it's actually quite important that yeah, we also take the aspect of defense seriously. Yes, I think there's like different impact areas to highlight for me. It's like open source and decentralized AI, but also using actually AI to advance science. Like all the areas we heard about today, be it neurotech or biosafety, could be advanced with AI, and I'll touch on briefly before wrapping up, like how they basically led me to the conclusion to work on those areas. So like I'm building a platform called Primate Lake, which is kind of like a peer-to-peer compute and intelligence protocol, really with the goal to make it like way more accessible for everyone, to accelerate human progress. And some of the things we did recently was, for example, training large foundation model of a 10B model size, like distributed across like Europe, Asia, and the US. As well as like advancing some differential like progress. So the first foundation model we built was like a metagenomic foundation model that basically discovers pandemics and wastewater. So it's like was a project with a team at MIT, and it's a good example of like differential acceleration because like it wasn't very expensive to build a model, but it helps us now to potentially discover the next pandemic extremely early, say at an airport. So I think there's all of those almost like opportunities also for like open source AI and decentralized AI to contribute differentially to the progress that like makes like AI progress go smooth. And I think the other thing is really like there has been a bunch of like interesting work obviously on making those systems safer and more aligned. But I think there hasn't been enough of that kind of work in the open, like with open source. So I think that's also another huge opportunity for like decentralized AI. So that also concludes my talk. So the conclusion is like DEAC provides like a really valuable framework for AI, and if you think like exponential, like pretty rapid AI progress is like ahead of us, then it's worth taking seriously like the huge benefits AI could potentially bring, but also the huge risks, and how kind of like the DEAC philosophy, but also crypto could play a part in like contributing to kind of like a positive outcomes for this. So I think it's like, yeah, like incredibly important that basically AI doesn't become like captured by like small groups or individuals or nation states, but rather that it's like kind of like openly accessible and with democratic inputs to everyone. So that's kind of, I think, like what DA can contribute to